Right now for you at 4:30, here's a question. Is your employer requiring you to get vaccinated? The White House, of course, announced a requirement for federal workers last week, and more companies are now doing the same thing. The governor is pretty much leaving it up to them here in Connecticut right now. Joining us this afternoon to talk more about it is attorney Gary Phelan, an employment lawyer with Michael J. London and Associates. Gary, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mark.
I think a lot of people are wondering, is it even okay for employers to look at you and say, okay, you want to come back to work, you have to get this shot? Can they do that?
It's very clear that it is lawful for employers to require the vaccine. They can, individuals may be entitled to a religious exemption for a sincerely held religious belief, or if it's due to a medical disability, they perhaps can't get the vaccine. But other than that, employers have every right to require a vaccine, and more employers are doing it, particularly in the last 2 weeks.
I was going to say we're seeing an uptick for sure with more and more companies taking these steps. What if people say no? Okay, I'm not going to do this. You're not going to force me to do this. Can a company then turn around and say, all right, well, you're fired?
They can, but the question is, what are the other options? For example, what some employers are doing, other than the religious exemption or the disability exemption, is what President Biden proposed last week for the federal agencies. Is the alternative is to undergo COVID testing, wearing a mask, a lot of the typical types of restrictions as an alternative. So not quite where you need a religious exemption or a medical exemption. But at the end of the day, if the employer has a mandatory vaccination policy, somebody says, I just don't want to get it, then the employer can terminate the employee.
It's interesting because the company, and correct me if I'm wrong, they could almost make it pretty difficult for you. All right, so you don't want the shot, no problem. Bring us a test result every couple of days, do ABC, kind of follow this procedure over the course of your employment to make it very difficult for you to kind of stay in line, right?
Yes, but I don't think the catalyst is really to make it difficult. It's to make it safe for the employees. What I'm seeing certainly is a lot more employees that are asking and want their employer to impose mandatory vaccination. Because they're concerned with their health. Obviously, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of friction, and that has gone up in the last 2 weeks. So on both sides of the equation, it's not just the employees being inconvenienced or being opposed to it, it's the other employees who want to stay safe.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, when you're working in an office environment, especially now with more and more people heading back to an office, there's obviously more of a concern for people who are there saying, okay, I've had this shot. I want to make sure everyone else around me has as well.
That's correct. And with the uptick of COVID cases, some employers who are going to be having a lot of their employees coming back to work, are having second thoughts and maybe putting that on hold for a while till we see what transpires as far as with the uptick due to the Delta vaccine or the Delta COVID variant.
And whatever could potentially come down the pike down the road. Attorney Gary Phelan, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate it. We appreciate your information.